now come to the time when we share ancient wisdom. And this is a story from the book of John, chapter 11, verses 17 through 44. This is, not so coincidentally, as Jeremy has already led us into, the story of Lazarus. When Jesus finally got there, he found Lazarus already 4 days dead. Bethany was near Jerusalem, only a couple of miles away, and many of the Jews were visiting Martha and Mary, sympathizing with them over their brother. Martha heard Jesus was coming and went out to meet him. Mary remained in the house. Martha said,
"Master, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Even now, I know that whatever you ask, God will give you."
Jesus said,
"Your brother will be raised up."
Martha replied,
"I know that he will be raised up in the resurrection at the end of time."
You don't have to wait for the end. I am, right now, resurrection and life. The one who believes in me, even though he or she dies, will live. And everyone who lives believing in me does not ultimately die at all. Do you believe this?
"Yes, Master. All along, I have believed that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world."
After saying this, Martha went to her sister Mary and whispered in her ear,
"The teacher is here and is asking for you."
The moment she heard that, she jumped up and ran out to him. Jesus had not yet entered the town, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When her sympathizing Jewish friends saw Mary run off, they followed her, thinking she was on her way to the tomb to weep there. Mary came to where Jesus was waiting and fell at his feet, saying,
"Master, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died."
When Jesus saw her sobbing, and the Jews with her sobbing, a deep anger welled up within him. He said,
"Where did you put him?"
Master,
Master,
come and see."
see.
They said. Now, Jesus wept. The Jews said,
"Oh, look how much he deeply loved him."
Others among them said,
Well, if he had loved him so much, why didn't he
do something to keep him from dying?
After all, he opened the eyes of a blind man.
Then Jesus, the anger welling up within him, arrived at the tomb. It was a simple cave in the hillside with a slab of stone laid against it. Jesus said,
"Remove the stone."
The sister of the dead man, Martha, said,
"Master, by this time there's a stench. He's been dead 4 days."
Jesus looked her in the eye.
"Didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?"
Then to the others,
"Go ahead, take away the stone."
they removed the stone. Jesus raised his eyes to heaven and prayed,
"Father, I'm grateful that you have listened to me. I know you always do listen. But for the sake of this crowd standing here, I've spoken so that you might believe that you sent me."
Then he shouted,
"Lazarus, come out!"
and he came out, a cadaver wrapped from head to toe, and with a kerchief over his face. Jesus told them,
"Unwrap him and let him loose."
And this is the word of the gospel.
Well, good morning. Oh my gosh, it is so good to be here. I've guest preached actually quite a bit this summer, and I will confess to you all that my family has never come to any of those. All of the family has never come to any of the churches I've been at this summer. So we were all excited this morning getting ready to come back to Cameron, to be in person, to just be here with you all. Makes my heart happy. And to sing Spirit of Life. I haven't sang Spirit of Life in a while, and sometimes those connections. I don't know if folks also know Amanda Heron, who is the administrative assistant for the Mile High Metro District. She has her office downstairs. She's here because she knew I was preaching today and was going to have the district office open downstairs for anyone who wants to pop in and see it. I was so excited when Val said that we could move our district office here. It was just felt kind of like coming home. So Amanda wanted to be here too. So if you haven't met her yet, she now works downstairs quite a bit during the week. I'm a little nervous, and I don't know why, but it really just is good to be here. So I actually preached this sermon a few weeks ago at Scott United Methodist, and we were doing some district stuff, so Val came to support as the congregational resource minister, and we got done with the service, and she said, "Can you come preach that at Cameron?" I was like, "Oh, that's either a really good thing or a really bad thing, I don't know. But sure, I'll come preach it at Cameron." This is kind of a sermon I've done throughout the summer. I was told when I became DS that I really only had to have 2 or 3 good sermons, and you could preach that all year long. So I'm hoping this kind of fits that. And it was interesting because this idea kind of all started about a month ago. Was asked to guest preach, didn't really know what to talk about, and found myself tired, just really kind of tired. And I recognized I've been tired a lot lately. Kaylee, who's 15, she's a sophomore at Chatfield High School, sophomore in high school. Morgan's 18, graduated high school. Kaylee's now a sophomore in high school. And starting about a week before school started, we started getting all the emails from Jefferson County about school. Mask mandates, COVID protocols, and then we started getting a different email about every week, email updates. And my inbox just seemed flooded with emails from the school about COVID and mask mandates and policies, and I just felt tired. I felt tired as a parent, I felt tired for the kids. I just kind of got exhausted from it. And the mask mandates, it gets all controversial. I don't want to start anything controversial this morning, but this constant and ongoing news about masks and COVID and the new variants coming out and the shortages in hospital beds, they're just an unwelcome reminder to me that we can't yet claim to be in a post-COVID world. And I keep finding myself wanting to use that term, coming out of COVID. Well, we're coming out of COVID. And I catch myself using it, and then I have to say, we're actually not yet. But man, I'm ready to be able to use that phrase, coming out of COVID, post-COVID. And as a district superintendent, the majority of my work this last year really has been focused on COVID ministry and COVID policies and COVID technology, and oh my gosh, what COVID has actually done for our church's technology. It's really kind of fun to see great screens. We didn't have that 6 years ago when I left, so wow, you all have done some work. But I have to admit, I'm kind of ready for something else to take center stage. I'm just kind of tired. And it's that sense of being tired, of just ready for all of this to be over, that actually has me concerned about myself and about folks in general. And that brings me to the Lazarus story. The Lazarus story, which I will say this is the first church who did readers' theater with Lazarus. That was fantastic. That actually got into the depth of the story a bit more, because this story is not for the faint of heart. It's not a light-hearted, happy story when you really delve into it. If read closely, the story is filled with anger and pain and emotion and grief and even the stench of death. Did you catch that? It was the stench of death. Scripture could be really fun if we had scent and if we had smell and sight with it. The stench of death, that'll take you into the story. In most churches, when the story is read, it really is read kind of in this lighthearted, fun way, but it's not a lighthearted story. And sometimes it's referred to as a resurrection story. People sometimes call it the resurrection of Lazarus. Personally, I think that's a misreading or a misrepresentation of the story, because Lazarus wasn't resurrected in this story. He was raised from the dead. And some might call that semantics, two different ways of saying the same thing, but I think they're actually two different things: resurrection and raising from the dead. Two very distinctly different events, at least scripturally they are. Because if you think for a moment about our resurrection stories of Jesus, and we have a number of them, we have a different story in all four of our Gospels, and we have resurrection stories in Gospels found outside the Bible as well. There are a variety of these stories, a variety of differences, but there is something similar in just about every one of Jesus' resurrection stories. And in each of these stories, Jesus doesn't simply raise from the dead, still draped in those death wrappings like Lazarus was. In Jesus' resurrection stories, there wasn't a stench of death present in the tomb that Martha was worried about. Jesus' resurrection stories are really different. They have a different tone and tenor altogether, because resurrection is different than raising from the dead. If you think about Jesus' resurrection stories, if you remember them very much, in each of the stories, the first folks that encounter Jesus don't even recognize him. They don't even know it's him. And that's always struck me, because it's the people that are closest to him, who've spent the last 3 years traveling with him, listening to him, spending pretty much all of their days with him. They don't even recognize him post-resurrection. Not until he breaks bread with them, not until he shares a meal with them, not until he sits at the table and joins in community. They didn't recognize him at first. And then even when they did, they weren't really sure they believed it. I don't fault them for that. I'm not sure I would either at the time. So not only does Jesus not emerge from the tomb in death wrappings, he emerged unrecognizable in physical appearance. Something happened in that tomb. Something that changed him. Something that changed the whole situation. Something, I would say, that even perhaps changed the people around him. He didn't just raise from the dead, back to the way things had been. He didn't return to what was. Jesus was resurrected, and everything was different. This pandemic has brought with it an incredible amount of loss. Loss of life, loss of security, loss of comfort, loss of familiarity, loss of normalcy. There's been loss. And we've been in the middle of what I would say perhaps is the longest tomb time in modern history. We're just still waiting to come out. And I think the church really is kind of still in that tomb. And at the same time, we're at a crossroads. We're at a point, I believe, where we get to choose which tomb we decide to emerge from. Lazarus' tomb or Jesus' tomb? We're at a crossroads where the decision is before us as local churches and as the big church collectively. We're at a point to choose, are we going to be raised from the dead, or are we going to be resurrected? Will we choose to simply go back to the way things used to be? To do everything in our power to return to pre-COVID church? There are some folks who are really fighting for this. To return with all the same programs, all the same classes, all the same order of worship, all the ways that it was before COVID. I equate that to emerging from the tomb still draped in the death wrappings of what the church used to be. We can choose that, or we can choose resurrection, transformation, something new. We can emerge from this time unrecognizable in a way that allows the church to be for the world of today and tomorrow, rather than the church of yesterday. About a month and a half ago, I was with a group of clergy, and we were having a similar conversation to this, and someone mentioned the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly. It's interesting, at Easter time, you see butterfly symbology all over the place in churches. We often talk about that transformation from the caterpillar to the butterfly and equate it with resurrection. And I'll be honest, I'd kind of forgotten that process. I remember there's the chrysalis, there's the cocoon, the butterfly comes out. It's this pretty little children's moment that we have with the kids at Easter time. But the process is really fascinating. And it goes much deeper than the stories we often tell. Because when that caterpillar goes into their chrysalis cocoon, if you remember, it actually starts to break down. It breaks down into a whole different substance. I was reading up on it, and they called it a soup. I didn't really like that phrase, so I'm calling it a goo. It breaks down into this kind of goo, this metamorphosizing goo when it's in the caterpillar. And that goo has everything that is needed to become a butterfly. It has all of the parts in there. It just needs time, like Amanda so very clearly reminded us. It just needs some time to become something new. And kind of right now, I feel like we're in that goo. It's a whole different substance right now than where we've been, but we haven't yet arrived at where we might be going. We're in this metamorphosizing goo time. And it's not just the pandemic, I think, that's led us to this place. It's the changing culture around us. It's the denominational tension and the potential split. It's the growing divisiveness in our country and the world. It's the voices of Black Lives Matter no longer willing to stay silent and creating some good trouble for our country. And it's the church wrestling with how to love and serve our neighbors, especially when that understanding of neighbors keeps changing on us. We're in the goo. We're in the tomb. The good news is, and I do think this is good news, we have all the parts that are needed for transformation, for resurrection. We have all the parts that we need if we're just patient and take the time. That's where I'm getting kind of tired. I keep having to remind myself, if we're just patient and take the time. Because raising from the dead, it's actually a whole lot easier than resurrection. It's a whole lot quicker too. We could just all decide to go back to the way it was, the way we know, the way that's comfortable and familiar. It's a whole lot easier to go back, to raise from the dead, than to take the time and the intentionality of resurrection. And so we get to choose. Individually, as churches, as society, we get to choose which tomb to come out of. Pastor Val, when she asked me to preach, she told me about the theme rooted and asked me to connect what I was preaching on with this theme of rooted and who Cameron has been and talk a little bit about my time here at Cameron. And so I had to laugh at that because the whole point of the sermon was to say, don't be focused on what was, think about what we're going to do forward, and now you're talking about rooted. All right. So it took me some time to think through some of the things I know that Cameron did while I was here that was both rooted and looking forward. And the one that stuck out the most, perhaps one of the things I'm most proud of that we did, I don't even know how many years ago this was when Cameron declared to be a church that would host and welcome same-gender unions before the Supreme Court did the ruling, and while it is absolutely against the denominational rules. We didn't care. I, as the clergy person, said, we're going to do a process. We're going to take a few months. We're going to be in conversation. We're going to do this really well. And the congregation said, no, we're not. We're just going to do it. We don't need 3 months of conversation to know what's right. We're going to declare ourselves an open church who will host and celebrate and welcome same-gender weddings long before others were doing it and before the Supreme Court had even done its ruling. And I was so proud of the congregation and our work in that, and realized as I was thinking through kind of what Val had asked me to connect, that's a great example of being rooted in who Cameron is and looking forward not only to who Cameron would be, but to how Cameron would impact the culture around, the community around. There is a DNA to Cameron that is about loving people, period. Whether it's popular, controversial, breaks rules, Cameron is first gonna love people. Cameron is the last church in the Mile High Metro District to return to in-person worship. The last of our Methodist churches to do hybrid in-person worship. And so I've been talking with Val kind of as you've all been through this process, and I've loved it because of the intentionality of this church to return to in-person worship was all about caring for people, taking care of one another. And the beads crack me up, I love it. Only Cameron would come up with a way to say, can you hug me or not hug me, without having to tell people no. The signs on the pews are hilarious, and just, it's hard to get cranky about not sitting in a pew and you're laughing at the signs. Part of the DNA, part of the rootedness, I think, of this community is to be so grounded in God's love that you can't do anything else but show that to people. And in some ways, that's countercultural. In some ways, that will lead this community into the future in an exciting way. So we're not yet coming out of COVID. We're still in the tomb. And so my question for you all is what tomb are you going to come out of? How are you going to choose resurrection? Not only individually, but as a community, and then as a community that reaches out into the wider community. How will Cameron choose to come out of this pandemic time resurrected into new life? Let us join in a prayer. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks, first and foremost, that your grace, your love, your presence is always with us. In the midst of a changing world, you are the constant that grounds us and connects us. Remind us that you call us to be your people, to love one another as Jesus loved us, to love one another so wholly that we can't help but see your presence in each person. We gather in person and across miles, knowing that it is you that connects us. Well, as we all go from this place, I hope that we go excited about what may be next, because we know we are rooted in the love of God so firmly within us that we can't help but love each other. May you go in God's grace and in God's peace. Amen.